Millions of years ago, our universe was created out of turmoil. Earth, protected by a magnetic force field that trapped air and water, slowly developed an environment. Our planet in turn gave birth to life, and man was born into an awesome world inhabited by sea monsters, dragons, and dinosaurs that fed on lush tropical vegetation. Legends tell of a magnificent civilization which flourished on the island continent of Atlantis. Were the citizens natives, or were they alien refugees from some distant galaxy? Maybe Atlantis never did exist, except in the minds of men who created fables about the rise and fall of empires. In Worlds in Collision, Dr. Immanuel Velikovsky expressed his theories on continuing catastrophic destruction within our universe. He outlines a history of astral disasters when comets, asteroids, or even our sister planets, Mars and Venus, pass too close to the Earth's orbit. Magnetic force fields interlocked, and a massive collision of sheer energy caused catastrophes throughout the solar system. Most planetary invaders burned up as they entered our protective atmosphere, but some crashed through the Earth's crust, causing volcanic eruptions, floods, major disasters. Could the disappearance of Atlantis, the greatest horror story of antiquity, be fact instead of fiction? Once we believed the Earth was flat, then we thought it was round. Geologists have discovered that the world is neither flat nor round, but pear-shaped. Early Greeks referred to a deviation in the stars when the continent of Atlantis was being swallowed up by the sea. Did Earth almost collide with Mars? Were these craters on Phoebus, one of her twin moons, caused by astral bombardment? Did other imploding asteroids cause the craters on our own moon, or was it volcanic explosions? Lunar mountain ranges are covered with cosmic dust. Does this relate to solar storms? Perhaps the stars did not deviate as the myth indicates. Earth had taken a different path around her sun. Atlantis, an entire continent, had disappeared from the face of the Earth in a single day and a single night. A dynamic civilization had been reduced to myth and legend. Over 2,300 years ago, Atlantis was described in great detail by the Greek philosopher Plato. Since then, thousands of books have been written about the mythical sea kingdom that might have existed from 12,000 BC to 9,000 BC. Immanuel Velikovsky is not the only free thinker who has speculated about disasters that occurred before the pages of our history books were written. Another theory proposes that asteroid A from the Atlantis group that orbits erratically through our universe plunged into our atmosphere. The huge mass, weighing billions of tons, trailed fire as it descended into the Atlantic Ocean. Its enormous impact set off a chain of explosions and volcanic eruptions along the Atlantic Ridge, from Iceland to the Azores. Meteor assaults could have played a part in the formation of the great troughs or trenches in the ocean floor. Over 5 miles deep, these unexplored ditches might contain relics of Atlantis. Otto Heinrich Mooke's theory of the Big Bang was not published until 20 years after his death. Mooke, a Viennese inventor and World War II scientist, was secretly obsessed with Atlantis. He began his research with the daring assumption that Plato's description of Atlantis should be regarded as true in almost every respect. He believed that the intrusion of asteroid A caused the oceans to rise all over the world, drowning most of Atlantis. Mooke was convinced that the Azores are the last remaining vestiges of the lost continent. His theories were developed from a scientific background. It is logical that these theories coincide with some geologists who maintain that sea level suddenly rose from 200 to 400 feet over the entire planet around 12,000 years ago. Perhaps Atlantis was involved with powers from outer space, and the citizens were victims of an intergalactic war. Maybe the civilization became a target because they misused their highly advanced technology. Were the Atlantean priests or scientists able to warn their people in time? Could man have escaped to another planet? For most of Atlantis, there could have been no escape. No escape but death. Why were the Atlantean people mentioned in legends and myths of every tribe and civilization that has walked the earth for the last 12,000 years? Is it some dim racial memory of our basic roots in that island continent that continues to haunt our subconscious minds? Do their ghosts still perform their mystical rites and ceremonies that should have died with them 12 centuries ago? Is it some sort of divine intention that their spirits have been reincarnated through these countless ages in order that their knowledge will help us create peace and harmony in the Aquarian Age? Was Atlantis warmed by the Gulf Stream while Europe was covered with glaciers? The Garden of Eden, symbolized in the Bible. Were the Atlanteans the red-skinned giants called Sea People that visited primitive tribes in both the Old and New World continents? Technology may have developed along a different path than the one that modern man trod so diligently. Emphasis may have been placed on psychic development. Fossil fuels such as natural gas and petroleum might have been recognized as pollutants before they were used to create energy and automatically discarded as poisonous and dangerous to the environment. Hydroelectric and geothermal energy, along with safe atomic power, could have driven machines that would have seemed magical to visitors from more primitive cultures. And what of the mythical crystals? Were they used as an energy source or in communication? Did this fabled race live in peace and harmony with each other and the world around them? Or had evil forces come into power and ultimately self-destructed the entire island continent? Edgar Cayce, America's most well-known psychic and clairvoyant, believed that the citizens of Atlantis were master telepaths and had little or no need of written records for their own use. He also spoke of the misuse of the Atlantean crystals to enslave minds and create people without souls. Did he mean robots, androids, or clones? Such achievements in technology are within the reach of our present civilization. Some of today's foremost psychics say that the Atlanteans brought on their own destruction by the misuse of cosmic energy through the power of their minds. Plato seems to document this theory when he accuses Atlantis of being obsessed with the wrongful pursuit of power. Yet Plato reports that they worshiped one god, a remarkable concept in view of the many gods held sacred by the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Indians of both Americas, and many of the cultures that came and went after the Holocaust of 9000 BC. Casey and other Atlantean scholars firmly assert that the records of this fantastic civilization were secreted within the Earth in several safe locations, so that future generations of mankind would have access to the knowledge of a lifestyle that is either a dream come true or a terrible nightmare. In ancient Greece, a magnificent group of scholars dedicated to preserving and increasing knowledge of the arts and sciences of all. Homer was the first to give mankind a written account of heroic deeds, explorations of foreign lands, and wars. About 387 BC, Plato founded the Academy as an institute for the systematic pursuit of philosophical and scientific research. Young men who joined the society were taught all the legends of their ancestors on the steps of temples. New knowledge of philosophy from Socrates was interchanged with mathematical theory from Euclid and Pythagoras. One of Plato's students was Aristotle, who later became the tutor of Alexander the Great. Aristotle must have told him of Plato's Republic, the first outline for a utopian civilization of the future. Alexander must have also known about Atlantis, Plato's highly developed culture of the past. He had established his famous library in Egypt and conquered but half the world, which reached as far as India to the east. He died in his early 30s. If he had lived, would he have sailed west to Spain and the Azores to conquer what remained of the mythical sea kingdom? Were the records of Atlantis held in the library of Alexandria in Egypt, which was sacked and burned for the last time in the 5th century? Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey described a city east of Athens called Troy. Historians labeled Troy a myth. In 1871, an amateur archaeologist discovered Troy by following his intuition and Homer's directions. Historians' only surviving written link to Atlantis is contained in 2 of Plato's dialogues, in which he says, "Once upon a time, there was beyond the strait you call the Pillars of Hercules, an island larger than Asia Minor and Libya together. On this island of Atlantis, there existed a great and admirable kingdom." Plato was quite specific in his description of the island empire. There was a population of approximately 20 million inhabitants. Their system of agriculture produced 2 crops per year. Animals and man lived in perfect harmony in a Garden of Eden environment. The island itself was protected on the north by a range of mountains. The tallest, probably a sleeping volcano, was the home of their one god. Mineral springs abounded in the tropical climate. Canals served their builders well, both as irrigation systems and transportation waterways. Its capital city was surrounded by an immense wall coated with bronze. Gold and silver glittered brightly from the roofs of buildings. Could the Egyptian priests who related the story of Atlantis to Plato's forefathers have been describing solar panels that used energy from the sun as a source of power? Life on Atlantis was peaceful and flowed in harmony with the existing vibrations of the universe. Every type of animal and flower known on the Earth today may have had its origins on Atlantis. The Atlantean farmers' techniques in horticulture and plant propagation must have been far superior to those used by today's agriculturists in his belated attempts to preserve the soil of this planet Earth. Many forms of tropical plants, fruits, vegetables, and trees have been found on the Atlantic coast of Spain and across the Mediterranean Sea along the uppermost parts of North Africa. Plant biologists have traced specimens from the same rootstock and seeds to the Americas, giving credibility to the idea that a continent once spanned the Atlantic Ocean. The traders of Atlantis could easily have transported animal and plant life to land masses on both sides of the island. How does this relate to the Garden of Eden? Was there more than one Garden of Eden? What about Noah and the Ark and taking all the animals aboard 2 by 2? It is speculated that man may have created many great civilizations like Atlantis in our prehistory, which were destroyed and later reconstructed after survivors from the disaster regrouped. Atlantis may provide the missing link in helping us to understand the unusual behavior patterns of many animals. Birds still circle the middle of the ocean, trying to land on a landmass that no longer exists. The plant and animal life of Atlantis may be one of the most important links in understanding where the survivors of the lost continent went and what kinds of flora and fauna they brought to their new environment. In the far cold places of the earth, great snows fell. They fell and piled up, for the summer sun could not melt them all. The weight of the new snows packed the old into the ice, and then as the weight increased, the ice began to flow. Creeping forward, great glaciers had slowly crossed the land covering the continent of Europe. Winds blowing off the ice turned nearby terrain into almost lifeless tundra, while the giant ice floes pushed their way relentlessly across the land. Scientists have advanced countless theories to explain ice ages, but no one has been accepted by all scientists. No expert has definitely established the end of the last ice age in mutually agreeable time span. We do know that the climate of the European coast underwent drastic changes 12,000 years ago. If Atlantis had suddenly disappeared from the face of the earth, the warm waters of the Gulf Stream would be tide-bound and forced to continue unimpeded to the European coast. The ice on the European continent had indeed begun to retreat into the Alps. And what of the survivors of Atlantis? In any Holocaust, by luck or preparation, both people and artifacts survive, so that future generations can question, explore, and guess at the origins of their ancestors. Evidence shows that civilized man has walked the earth for at least 30,000 years. Neanderthal man roamed the European continent at the dawn of time and was replaced by the Cro-Magnon man. Anthropologists do not know where Cro-Magnon man originated. They can guess that his home must have been somewhere east of Europe. Radiation could have been at dangerously high level. Survivors would descend deeply into caves with livestock they had salvaged. Was Cro-Magnon man and his descendants our only heritage from the Atlantis disaster? He could be the missing link in Darwin's theory of evolution. Was this early cave painting that so accurately depicts the bull a project for a bored Atlantean artist? Did the beginnings of the religious cults of the Minoans who worshipped the bull originate in the underground maze of caves in Spain? Why do some of the Spanish cave markings bear a remarkable resemblance to etchings on stones in the high plains of South America? Evidence has documented civilized man's presence in Ireland thousands of years before the Celts. Were the spirals that are so common on both sides of the Atlantic left by the legendary sea people as a clue to their origins? What could have inspired the early Egyptian dynasties to erect this magnificent temple, decorated with giant seashells, in the middle of the desert? Egypt never was a civilization that sailed the seas, but depended on others to import and export goods. An aqueduct at Jericho was constructed a few hundred years after Atlantis was supposed to have met disaster. Why was this city located so far inland? There's neither water nor arable land sufficient to produce food for the builders or the occupants. Was Jericho planned before the destruction of Atlantis as a shelter for refugees? Who were the builders of the Sphinx and the pyramid? An Arab legend tells of a secret room beneath the Sphinx. It will be opened when man again becomes a perfect balance of positive and negative, neither right nor left-handed, and is born again on Earth. This legend could refer to the superior psychic powers that the Atlanteans were supposed to have mastered. Was it their technology that erected these mystical monuments in the desert? Across the Atlantic, monuments erected by the long-dead kings have been discovered in the jungles of Mexico. These pyramids are a mystery because of the engineering skills of their builders. The Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon near Mexico City are in perfect astronomical alignment. The folklorico of Mexico tells of a god king who destroyed the pyramids when people fell to evil ways. There are other stories of how this same god taught them how to rebuild their temples. At Tikal, in Guatemala, a step pyramid is surrounded by dozens of ancient temples and tombs. That same type of pyramid can be found in Egypt. Pyramids on both sides of the Atlantic seem to have a common cultural origin, which could be attributed to the island continent. Did the ancient architects give their secrets of construction to both continents? Mayans built gigantic ball courts where only the body could be used to get the ball through the stone ring high up on a wall. Today, similar sports are played by the Basques and the Irish. Is it possible that this particular athletic contest originated independently in each area of the world where it is performed? There are certain rigid rules that are observed during the events that indicate a common origin. The athletes exhibited unusual dexterity and were able to accomplish phenomenal feats. Their training for the contest was based on rigid mental and physical discipline, so that they could tap free-flowing energy to enhance their skills. The winner was often sacrificed to the gods. The Basques have no known origins. They appeared suddenly in the Alpine region between France and Spain, along with other European races such as the Huns, Celts, and the Welsh. The Basques have a curious language accompanied by symbols and customs which seem to be duplicated by isolated Indian tribes in the Americas. Are the Basques of today descendants of the survivors? Did their ancient ancestors flee from death to the icy mountains where their sons and daughters would be born into a cold and hostile climate? The Basques prefer to live their lives much as their fathers did, and their grandfathers before them. Dr. Maxine Asher, founder of the Ancient Mediterranean Research Association, is accompanied by co-directors Marvin Luckerman and Lowell Ponte. They are engaged in a perpetual search for information about the lost cities of Atlantis in libraries all over the world, such as this one at California State University, Northridge. Dr. Asher is a unique individual. She's a researcher, lecturer, author, and educator.
We know from fossils like these, found near Segovia in the mountainous area of Spain, that the entire Earth was underwater at one time. We know that many civilizations rose and fell, and Atlantis is one of those civilizations. I began my studies of Atlantis in the Mediterranean and in Europe, and ultimately I was led to Spain, where Plato said Atlantis existed near the Gates of Hercules, one of which is Gibraltar and the other is Tangier. My original interest in Atlantis came from my studies of the Etruscans when I was a student at this university, California State University at Northridge. It seemed to me very strange that the Etruscans had no origins that could be identified. And when I asked my professors where the Etruscans came from, they said from the east. I then went to the Etruscan lands in Italy and explored their tombs and found that they did construct giant megalithic blocks around their tumuli or tombs, and that they were very similar to many other peoples in Europe whose origins were also undiscovered. The Celts and the Welsh and the Basque and many other tribes in Europe, including the Huns or the Hungarians, have mysterious origins.
Could ancient seafarers, perhaps the Norsemen, the Irish, or the Etruscans, have been the carriers of ancient cultures between the two continents? Most races had mariners, even the Etruscans. Stark tombs give little, if any, clues to their mysterious origins.
When I was in Ecuador, I was amazed to find an artifact like the one I'm holding in my hand that is basically Egyptian in character, looks a lot like an Egyptian mummy. And of course the big question is, how did the Egyptians get to Ecuador? I talked to a number of scientists and archaeologists in Ecuador, and I made inquiry into the famous caves of Taos, referred to by Eric von Daniken in Gold of the Gods. And one of the hypotheses that was suggested was that in fact the Atlanteans, or the Atlantean survivors, did come down the Amazon River in some fashion, came into Mexico, and we had the cross connection between the Mediterranean, between Egypt, and between South America. Here's another artifact that comes from an area near Esmeraldas, which is in the northern part of Ecuador. Again, very Egyptian in its orientation. We also find Oriental influences in Ecuador, and two archaeologists, Betty Meggers and Clifford Evans, have discovered vestiges of Japanese and Chinese kinds of artifacts in South America. So we see that ancient man traveled and migrated and probably came across both the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans in a land bridge. Also in Guatemala, we realize the tremendous impact of earth upheaval, the fact that when the earthquake occurred in Guatemala, the entire harbor rose many feet. And we realize that this rising and falling of land tells us that the rising and falling of Atlantis was in fact a geologic fact, a geologic possibility.
The jungles of Central and South America are abundant hunting grounds for explorers, historians, and treasure seekers. Many people have traveled into the perilous underbrush, risking their lives to find the hoard of gold that Montezuma hid from the Spanish invaders. Some were stricken with strange jungle fevers and, facing impossible hardships, were forced to turn back, forever blighted by their experience. Some expeditions encountered hostile Indian tribes and never returned at all. While English explorers concentrated their energies and interests on Egypt, American archaeologists turned to South America for their cultural investigations. When Ignatius Donnelly, a Philadelphia attorney, wrote Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in 1882, a new breed of researcher braved the unfriendly jungle environment, searching for survival sites and the missing records of the mythical lost continent. Some bounty hunters looked only for treasure. A few of them smuggled priceless artifacts out of the rebellious South American nations. Border guards were bribed, and irreplaceable pre-Columbian carvings miraculously appeared in museums and private collections. Others were unsuccessful in their quest for highly saleable merchandise, or were caught attempting to get their loot through customs. Historians regard the removal of an artifact from its site of origin without proper record keeping as the vilest type of treachery. Once an urn, carving, or even a piece of pottery is removed from the place where it was found without studying relative surroundings, such as rocks, inscriptions, and other clues that could provide a proper time reference, it becomes worthless in piecing together our prehistory. Sacrificial wells have yielded vast treasures of ornate jewelry, encrusted with semi-precious stones. Gold and silver, among other pure metals, have always been in abundant supply in the New World. Metal urns and stone idols, such as the one found here, continue to appear as explorers discover yet another pool where people gave their most priceless possessions, if not their lives, to appease their jealous gods. In recent years, dozens of expeditions have been launched into the plains, deserts, jungles, and rarefied mountainous areas of Central and South America. Explorers and historians are forever pursuing hard evidence that Atlantis and other mythical empires did exist. Their painstaking efforts and meticulous procedures have shed a new light and brought more understanding to the world about the characteristics of the cultures of the Maya and the Inca. Both civilizations had achieved much in science, mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. Both appeared from nowhere and disappeared in the same mysterious manner. Early in the 19th century, amateur and professional archaeologists began to probe the New World's ancient ruins. In 1839, John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood set out to explore abandoned Maya cities in the snake-infested jungles of Central America. The adventurers landed in Guatemala in the midst of a chaotic three-way civil war and were quickly thrown into a local jail by a band of drunken soldiers. Fortunately, the two men were able to establish their identities and convince an official they were not mercenaries. After their release from prison, they continued their explorations, cautiously dodging rival armies. After they returned to the United States, Stephens' exuberant writings and Catherwood's intricate sketches set off the first wave of archaeological expeditions to Middle America. Atlantis may play a prominent part in the final solution to the mysterious origins of the people of the New World. Some of the ruins in Mexico and Central America were obviously constructed after Cortez landed. Stones have been interlocked and cemented with mortar, the same technique we use today for some of our buildings. This ruin is only a few hundred years old and is crumbling away under the harsh tropical climate. Yet the really ancient cities that are 1,000 years old or more are still in relatively good condition once the vegetation is removed. Howard Bingham of Yale University found these blocks of stones that had been cleaved so well that they had survived for thousands of years. They are part of a city that had been untouched by the outside world for over 350 years. It was never reached by the 16th century Spanish explorers, and except for plant overgrowth, remained completely intact. Its name is lost in time. Bingham called it the Lost City of the Incas. Tourists have named it the Jewel of the Andes. Why was this fortress constructed in front of a giant natural pyramid near the top of a rugged 19,300-foot mountain in the Peruvian Andes? Inca aqueducts still carry water from nearby springs to replenish city fountains. Can this technology be connected to the city of Jericho on the other side of the Atlantic, built in 8000 BC? What of the mysterious Inca markings on the Nazca Plains, originally deciphered by an American historian, Paul Kozak? He thought he had discovered the largest astronomy book in the world, etched into a plain high in the Andes. Could this be a remnant of the Atlantean culture? Or is it some sort of landing field for extraterrestrials, as proposed by Eric van Daniken? Giant spiders, whales, and other mysterious hieroglyphics are found in huge patterns and echoed in strange formations of stone. Dr. Maria Reich, who lives in a simple adobe hut on the edge of the plain, is dedicated to proving Kozak's original theory. Perhaps the markings are an immense calendar of the present, past, and possibly the future. It is known that the desert etchings are at least 1,500 years old. What special building techniques were used in the construction of the temples of Yucatan? Are these symbols connected to those found on the high Andean plain? Could this be the wisdom of the ancients from the time of Atlantis, which might have given birth to the early South American civilizations? There are two mythical figures. One was a god and the other a mortal, who was a priest king. According to legend, the priest king arrived at Tula in the year of Two Rabbit, where he built his house of penance. And his sign was Seven Wind in the ancient count of days. Europe was in the Dark Ages. He abolished human sacrifice and taught that the only offerings to the gods should be tortillas, flowers, incense, and butterflies, and snakes. Every man, as well as the gods, was born under a particular sign that controlled his destiny. The Mayans were obsessed with time. Through centuries of astronomical observation, they learned to calculate and record movements of the stars. Also, they were able to predict both solar and lunar eclipses. Although they had no way of expressing certain number combinations, they kept records so accurately that they could account for the discrepancy between their year of 365 days and the true solar year. Dr. Asher discusses the finds at Bimini.
One of the more promising sites for Atlantis research is Bimini Island in the Bahamas. Many diving teams have explored at Bimini. There have been diving teams conducted by Peter Tompkins, author of Secrets of the Great Pyramid. There have been diving teams conducted by the Russians, and the Ancient Mediterranean Research Association conducted explorations at Bimini under my direction in 1973. And what we found at Bimini Island in the Bahamas was an entire megalithic road, an entire structure that actually had been discovered in 1968 by Dr. J. Manson Valentine under a grant from the Edgar Cayce Foundation.
Dr. Manson Valentine, historian, professor of zoology, and member of the New York Explorers Club.
One of the most interesting things I found in these early surveys was a series of room-like compartments on the coast of Bimini. This was on North Bimini to seaward, that is to say on the west side near the drop-off, and this was the first indication I had had of an artifact existing in that part of the world. September the 2nd, 1968. I was diving with some companions. We were not looking for artifacts at all or any sort of a confirmation of Cayce's predictions. We were out looking for a pinnacle. It was a very strange mountain with straight sides that rises from 3,000 feet to about 60 feet of the surface. Well, what we found under the water at 3 fathoms, roughly 18, 20 feet, was a pavement, what I considered to be a very fine artifact, undisputable artifact, because this pavement was composed of not only small stones, but then in areas it became extremely large stones, as large as 20 feet in one dimension. It's a very peculiar layout. There are at least 300 yards of stones in a double rank, and then many hundreds of feet of small avenues composed of extremely large and very closely fitted stones. This is just one of the smaller stones. It was cut in half, and the top side, you see, had been eroded by invasion from marine organisms during the ages. The bottom of it is perfectly flat because it was resting on the sand. Well, this is typical of the stone that forms on the coast. It is a very hard limestone formed by the accretion of sand grains and shells, and then invaded with the salts of silicon, so that you get a really almost a glassy, hard limestone. It rings like a bell. You cannot break it with a sledgehammer. It does not have a natural cleavage, and our scientific confrères claim that this is naturally cleaved stone. Well, I can prove that it is not. Now, some of these very large stones on the Great Avenue are elevated on little pillars, little columns, one at each corner. What I think it is a ceremonial center. Now, the fact that some of the very large stones are propped up on columns like the dolmens of the coast of Brittany and of the Branco Valley in South America and Brazil. This points out the religious nature, the probable religious nature of the artifact. So I would say it very easily could be a ceremonial center. Well, it has been officially estimated by a carbon test of a fossil mangrove reef, which was found in approximately 10 feet of water in the vicinity, and that carbon dating was in the neighborhood of 6,000 years ago. I don't take a great deal of stock in carbon dating because of certain anomalies that have occurred in it, and this is in deeper water, so it must be at least 10,000, and since it is definitely pre-cataclysmic in nature, it must therefore be considered to be in that dating category, around 10 to 11,000 years old.
Why do some brave men deliberately endanger their lives by climbing the tallest mountains on Earth? Is it just because they are there, or could it be a human hunger for adventure? a high and glorious time of intense trial, when strength is revealed and weakness is laid bare. Adventure is also timeless. It has neither nationality or race. Perhaps it is this thirst for danger that is the common denominator that ties all men of today to the survivors of the Atlantean Holocaust. In our own century, adventure and science have become the same thing, for exploration is now the sport of scientists. Man's laboratory has become all of Earth and the universe that contains it. Atlantean researchers are risking their credibility as scholars and scientists and are kin to the adventurer who tries to open the doors of the impossible. Can we believe the tales of the native guides that tell us about the Yeti, a human-like creature covered with fur that lives deep in uncharted caves? There are legends about the Yeti carrying off the women from the villages at the base of the rugged terrain. They've been sighted from time to time by expeditions, but the raw climate with its unpredictable temperature changes, plus the Yeti's reputation, has deterred man from pursuing him into his lair. Is he a survivor from pre-Atlantean civilization? What about the mammoths and the dinosaurs found in the Siberian wastelands? Undigested tropical vegetation was still in their stomachs. Lowell Ponty, internationally known author, lecturer, and syndicated columnist, believes the Earth is in a new ice age.
Why look for Atlantis? Why care about something that disappeared thousands of years ago? Because it could be true. And if it's true, that means our history books are false. I was like a lot of people. I went through school believing those history books. I thought they were just truth. But they're not. Our history books are a story written basically by the people who happen to be on top at this moment in history. So why haven't we tried to provide a new version, a better story? Why are we content to believe that suddenly we came out of the caves and down from the trees in the jungles and suddenly built calendars better than we use today? We're building pyramids, we're creating star charts of phenomenal accuracy. Maybe our history isn't as we've been taught about it. And maybe we deserve to know the truth. Only a few thousand years ago, Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, all of New England lay under thousands of feet of ice in what today we call the Great Ice Age. Back then, that ice came from somewhere. It came from water in the oceans. And the oceans were 250 feet lower than what we call sea level today. A lot of things were different then. Perhaps a lot of island continents or cities like Atlantis, a lot of then seacoast cities, had people dwelling in them that today are underwater. And other things were different too. For example, Asia, Siberia, was actually part of North America, where today we have a bunch of water between Alaska and Siberia that we call the Bering Strait. Then, that was a land bridge. Today, it's underwater 150 feet deep, so then it was 100 feet above water. And people, animals, even trees could walk from Asia to become the Indians of North America today. And so our planet Earth has seen floods, not just one, but many of them. The floods of Noah, maybe the flood that wiped away the island continent of Atlantis. And these floods have been caused by rapid changes in our planet's climate. Changes much more rapid at the end and the beginning of ice ages than we ever used to think possible. With recent severe winters in the northeastern United States, with crazy weather going on all over the world, snow in Miami, frost in Brazil wiping out the coffee crop, where never did we see weather like that before, it could be that we are at the dawn of a new ice age. An ice age that could be upon us, say scientists, in less than 100 years. And then, too, we're going to see changes in the levels of the ocean, followed a few thousand years later by yet more floods that some new mythologists a few millennia down the road will have to write about.
Would the American Indian tribes flee from a catastrophe when they crossed the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska? The Hopi Indians may have been the first to settle down to tribal lands in the United States. In song and dance, they tell of a passing through of almost every tribe in both the Americas. Why did they build their villages and farms on high mesas so far away from the few permanent rivers of the area, known as Four Corners, where the boundaries of 4 states intersect? Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico. The Hopis call it the center of the Fourth World. They have a complicated irrigation system which involves carrying water from the rivers below for crop irrigation. They are aware of summer and winter solstice and are always prepared for droughts and famines. They are a peaceful tribe that tends its fields well and builds structures that last for many years. Orabi has been occupied for at least 800 years and is the oldest lived-in community in the United States. The Hopis have kept to the old ways. Intermarriage with other tribes is rare. They are not tempted by the white man's firewater nor his new ways. They have lived the Hopi way. This is a pure democratic system that enslaves no one, does not raise an aristocracy, and involves complete attunement to nature and the environment. Their art of weaving baskets and making pottery has been preserved through the ages, just as the Navajos have kept their tradition of rug making and crafting turquoise jewelry. Where did this culture that has managed to remain unaffected by other societies throughout the ages originate? According to their myths and legends, all mankind lived at the bottom of a 7-story subterranean mountain. It was wet, and all people had webbed hands and feet. Their earth goddess sent her twin sons to lead them to the place of emergence at the navel of the world. The people dried out in the sunlight, lost their webs, and began to wander toward the east. And what of their ancient prophecy that the fifth world, the Aquarian Age, will be heralded by another Holocaust, and that man, originally created in 4 colors, black, white, red, and yellow, will live in peace and harmony? Could the Hopis be descendants of a religious cult of Atlantis that built a sanctuary for its members? Did the builders of these spectacular cities come from the north or from the east? The Hopi legends tell of visitors from a great red city far to the south. Could they have been referring to skin color and not the actual color of the city? The Mayans disappeared from their cities and then returned, sometimes after a few hundred years, to rejuvenate or renovate the ancient structures. It is hard to conceive that a civilization with their technology would melt into the jungles and then reappear centuries later with many of the same skills. Perhaps segments of the tribes migrated to other locations in the world during the mysterious disappearances. Why were the Mayans so preoccupied with death? They slaughtered some 50,000 women and children every year. Edgar Casey, the American psychic, said that Atlantis had created the practice of sacrifice so that the slaves would be reincarnated with their own soul in another life. Perhaps the original Mayans were survivors, and the principles of sacrifice remained while the reason for them had been lost in antiquity. Was there a pre-Mayan culture that understood the arch? A corbel arch is formed when stones are joined together to form a pyramid at the top of a doorway. Only civilizations with advanced engineering skills have been able to successfully balance these structures so that they could support tremendous weights. Is the corbel arch a common bond between Mayan and Mediterranean cultures? Stone markers exist in Yucatan and Guatemala, but they are mute about their origins or purpose. Across the Atlantic, we find more corbel arches on islands in the Mediterranean Sea, thousands of miles from the jungles of Guatemala. Some are entrances to tombs or treasuries that have withstood the ravages of time. Whatever these structures contained was spirited away by someone long ago. Perhaps the original civilization left nothing behind, but instead took the contents with them to another place and time. Domed ceilings of interlocking stones are silent witnesses to civilizations long vanished from this earth. Civilizations that are in our history books. Could they have been the end result of a previous technology? Dr. Maxine Asher.
at Stonehenge, I photographed a face on one of the standing stones that I believe has never been photographed before, based on an intuition to examine this stone with a certain perception and from a certain point of view.
Henry James, a British author, once said that Stonehenge, a group of monuments at Salisbury in England, stands as lonely in history as it does on the Great Plain. Legend traces the origins of the stones to Africa. They were erected by the Sea People on a mountain in Ireland and were called the Dance of the Giants. Merlin, the magician, convinced King Arthur to send an army for the stones. After he conquered the Irish, Arthur and his men could not move the giant rocks. Merlin instructed the men how to build special machines, and the stones, which had the powers of witchcraft, were moved by ship and reconstructed exactly as they were found. Gerald Hawkins, author of Stonehenge Decoded, thinks of the structure as a giant computer that is capable of accurately predicting the movements of the sun and the stars. The 56 Audrey holes used in conjuncture with the stones plot the movements of the moon. Religious cults may have used the monuments for ceremonies and sacrifices, but the stones arrived in the British Isles long before they or the Romans came. W.S. Brackett was the first man to attribute the ancient architecture to marvelous people of Atlantis in 1883. Egerton Sykes of Brighton, England, is the dean of all Atlantean scholars. He has devoted the last 50 years of his life to research and study of ancient myths about the lost cities of Atlantis.
I have been able to pinpoint 4 Atlantean cities and to produce artifacts from 3 of them.
The 3 cities that can be visited today are Dublin, Tenerife, and Cadiz. The 4th is underwater near Bimini. A great deal of the new information that Sykes generously shares is based on the ancient written records of the Celts and the Irish. Sykes first became interested in Atlantis when he was recuperating from a wound in a hospital after World War I. The only book he had to read was a tattered copy of Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis. His revision of the original book is now in its 20th printing. Well past his 80th birthday, he still continues his quest for Atlantis. Marvin Luckerman, researcher, editor, and publisher, took part in archaeological expeditions at Jericho and other excavations in Israel for 2 years.
With the destruction of Atlantis about 10,000 BC, there seems to be a new wave of immigrants coming into the Holy Land. This new group is called the Natufians. They brought with them a rise of civilization because they brought with them agriculture. Also, at the same time, maybe about 1,000 years later, we have in the same area the rise of civilization with the beginning of a city at Jericho. It is at Jericho about 8,000 BC that we have the first city. This city seems to be out of place. It's too early, yet it does seem to have some connections with Western Europe. Later on, we have in Anatolia a site called Hasalar in Turkey relating to Jericho. And then there seems to be another destruction. But this all seems to relate back to new immigrants coming from Europe, probably fleeing from some sort of a catastrophe. This took place in the early Neolithic in the Holy Land and in Turkey.
Thor Heyerdahl, famous for saving his raft, Kon-Tiki, across the Pacific Ocean, became intrigued with the idea that the Egyptians might have been ocean seafarers. According to him, their boats were made from papyrus. The Egyptian preoccupation with the sea was reflected in this temple built in the middle of the desert. Using tomb paintings as a guide, Heyerdahl built Ra-2, a 41-foot vessel made from the same materials used 5,000 years ago. He and a 7-man crew set sail from Moroccan coastal waters on May 17, 1970. Heyerdahl arrived safely in his flimsy paper boat in the Barbados Islands on July 12th of the same year. Thor Heyerdahl had risked his life once more to prove a point. Commerce was possible between the Old World and the New World some 4,000 years after Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea. Did goods from Africa make their way to this city high in the mountains of Ecuador? Did the survivors lose touch with each other only to have their myths revived by their descendants who braved the crossing of the Atlantic? Giant stone heads weighing several tons have been found throughout the Yucatan jungles. These almond-eyed, inscrutable faces seem to be Oriental in their origins. A recently discovered Mixtec head has the features of an African tribesman. Other sculptures and figurines have a Semitic look to them. Deep in the dense jungles of southern Mexico lies an enormous Mayan complex. Snarling stone jaguars appear to be intimidating other creatures that are almost alien to this world. A familiar arrangement of cubic chain carvings seems to echo the ancient Greek design of life. Are these interpretations of the original Toltec artists? If not, who were the original models? Steps, endless steps, lead to the gigantic temple of the inscriptions. What cryptic message from the ancient Maya is recorded within its underground tunnels? Tunnels that are formed in an endless maze, like the ones found under the temples in Crete. Could some psychics be right about the ancient records of Atlantis being buried here under this very temple in some secret vault? The lost city of the Incas, high in the Peruvian plain of the Andes, had to be inhabited mostly by women. Over 100 burial caves were discovered near the fortress. Out of the 173 skeletal remains, researchers determined that 150 of these were females. Had they been hidden high in the mountains from the invading Spanish conquistadors? And what of the Olmecs, whose stone heads have been found near this giant complex at Palenque and throughout southern Mexico? Were they just a tribe in the jungles? How could they have had the skill and artistry to carve hard granite into such magnificent monuments to their society? Were the cities of the jungles built upon the sites of their original villages? Or were the original builders of the pyramids destroyed by a god in Mexican mythology, which have been recreated by the ancient Maya? Were the Olmec seafarers or survivors of Atlantis that sailed the Atlantic Ocean to the continent of Africa? Could it have been nature, volcanic eruption, earthquakes, instead of a god that destroyed the original pyramids of Yucatan? And what of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, such as the Bahamas? Certainly a seafaring race would have visited them and had some sort of commercial routes established. Strange stone structures and pyramids have been found off the coast of Yucatan, near the Mayan city by the sea. Could these underwater monuments be part of that city, or are they the relatives of the ancient stones found at Bimini? This exquisite walled city was probably built or reconstructed by the Toltecs, a culture known for their love of beauty and art. To be a Toltec is to be an artist, so say the ancient legends of Mexico. The Toltecs came after the Mayans, but many of the fossilized remains discovered in the area tell us that the original city or village was built by a civilization that might have existed as long as 12,000 years ago.
There is another source of information on Atlantis that should be considered, and that is psychic data or intuitive data. Many people have a recollection or have thoughts about Atlantis based on what the great psychologist Jung called the collective unconscious. Other people are drawn to discoveries in the ancient world, archaeological discoveries, based on their intuition or their dreams or their thoughts about the subject. One of the greatest discoveries in Assyria was made as the result of a dream had by Henry Layard, a French archaeologist. The palace of Nimrud was excavated after Layard's famous clairvoyant dream. In my work on Atlantis, I've been led to many discoveries, which I mention in my book, Ancient Energy, Key to the Universe. One of the discoveries was an artifact found in Isla Mujeres, a small island off the coast of Yucatan. I had a hunch, or an intuition, to walk along the beach in a certain direction away from the group. In a cave, I found what looked originally like a shell, but which later turned out to be what I believe is an ancient ornament. Has a small hole here, somebody perhaps wore it around their neck, and it has some tiny inscriptions in it of an unknown variety. Often people are led to intuitive discoveries. In Arizona, while television and radio reporters watched, Tony Arlotta, a famous clairvoyant psychologist, uncovered burial after burial at the Pima Maricopa Indian grounds without one shred of evidence on the surface of the ground to lead him to that burial. So we must consider this kind of evidence. Other discoveries have been made at various sites in the world based on intuition. At Gibraltar, I discovered some pre-Phoenician inscriptions, which were later confirmed as such by a famous linguist, based on a hunch I had that these inscriptions, which are the paving stones leading to the Rock of Gibraltar, were actually very old. So what I'm saying is, in dealing with the problem of Atlantis, we must give credence to or consider, along with the scientific data, the hunches, the intuitions, and the actual discoveries of people who are using what I call another way of knowing.
A civilization of seafarers built a magnificent city on a low hill on the island of Crete. A long rectangle palace, entirely enclosed by buildings, runs north and south. Courtyards and other buildings surround the multi-storied palace. Large porches borne up by giant red pillars give shade and shelter in the great courtyard. On a hill overlooking this masterpiece created by man over 4,000 years ago are ruins that date much further back into antiquity. Described as Neolithic, bits of pottery could be the remains of an Atlantis outpost. Is the spiral maze under this palace the home of the legendary Minotaur, half man, half bull? According to the Greek myths, the most beautiful of their children had to be sent to Crete and sacrificed to the terrible monster. If they refused, the wrath of this demon god would destroy the mainland of Greece. Theseus, one of the legendary Greek heroes, entered the maze and destroyed the awesome god creature. Why would a race of sailors worship the bull? Was the bull considered a symbol of fertility? Perhaps the animal was symbolic of bravery and beauty to a society that sailed the seas. The people from Crete might have admired bulls because they were dangerous and had a gift for treachery. The people of Crete were not well thought of by the Greeks, Egyptians, or the other Mediterranean cultures they encountered. They were called liars and cheats. Was this because they were so wealthy, or because they worshipped the devil god, which had distorted the morality of their civilization? Could the cult of the bull have been born in this Spanish cave many thousands of years before the golden age of bull worship on Crete? Dr. Maxine Asher.
One very specific instance of a myth that came to fruition was Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy in the 19th century, based on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. This is true also in Greece, where Sir Arthur Evans excavated the palace at Knossos, based on the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. And of course, the myth was highly accurate in describing the archaeological site at Knossos.
It is believed that King Minos was the builder of the 6-acre metropolis discovered by Evans in 1884. In that ancient king's honor, Evans proposed that the people of that Bronze Age civilization be called Minoans. They were master masons, borrowing from all the existing cultures and then improving and coordinating architectural ideas. Interior walls were built of rubble, set with mortar in a timber frame, and were finished with a plaster face. The outer walls were of stone or had stone facing. The courts are paved with flagstones and cement and are traversed by slightly raised footpaths. Wide flights of steps mount from one courtyard to another, and an odd arrangement of another flight set at right angles to the first, but leading nowhere. Evans' Minoans must have been highly sophisticated. They had underground plumbing, bathrooms, a form of air conditioning and heating, and a love of high fashion. Could their lifestyle be an echo of modern times, today, or of the lost cities of Atlantis? Marvin Luckerman.
In the recent years, the search has been focused on an island in the Aegean Sea between Crete and Athens. This island is Santorini. Many people believe it to be Atlantis. The reasons are that it's an island that was destroyed spectacularly by a volcano. It had a high culture, and interestingly enough, was destroyed approximately about 1470 BC. Now, Plato had said 9400 BC, but if you take the years out and you put months instead of years, the date comes around 1470 BC. However, I believe that to be incorrect. In the first place, it's mentioned beyond the Straits of Hercules, which is definitely Gibraltar. Secondly, it did have a high culture, a late Bronze Age culture, but it is not anything more specific than any other late Bronze Age culture in the area. And finally, the date itself, 1450 BC, is recorded because of Egyptian connections. Now, I've been working for the last several years on a theory of history that says that ancient history is off by 500 years, which would mean that the 1450 BC date would be 1050 BC or 900 BC.
One of the first people to research Atlantis in 1967 was Dr. Angelos Gallinopoulos, a seismologist at Santorini. At first, Dr. Gallinopoulos said that his find at Santorini was Atlantis, and he got a carbon dating of that area of 1476 BC. And at that time, apparently, there was a terrific cataclysm equal to 32 hydrogen bombs or something in that neighborhood, and the whole island sank. And Dr. Gallinopoulos said, yes, Atlantis exists in Greece. Now, my own research in Spain shows that 9600 is a date we would prefer to ascribe to the sinking of Atlantis. Therefore, the Santorini finds, in my opinion, could not be Atlantis. However, they could be related. In Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, he indicates that the Atlanteans actually had a war with the people in Greece. Now, if that's true, then perhaps there was a civilization around Crete, around Santorini, that was existing at the same time as Atlantis, and that it sank at the same time that Atlantis sank, around 9600 BC, and that what Dr. Gallinopoulos found was just a survival site, was a place where Atlantean survivors had been, and this was just another a vestige of Atlantis at a later date. But I don't believe that Santorini is the original Atlantis as described by Plato.
Magnificent red pillars forming long colonnades that have been restored so that modern man can see the grace and glory created by a long-dead civilization. Was it an earthquake or a terrible war that destroyed this marvelous way of life that flourished on Crete 1,500 years before Christ was born? Were they able to communicate with the dolphins? And are the dolphins themselves refugees from the destruction of Atlantis? Discoveries at Santorini, combined with advances made in scuba diving equipment, ignited a vast treasure hunt throughout the coastal waters of the Greek islands. For many years, divers had brought up treasures lost at sea in some ancient storm by the Etruscans, the Phoenicians, the Athenians, and the Romans. Could any records of Atlantis have survived the Holocaust that destroyed the Minoans, or the huge explosion 1,500 years later on Santorini, described by Gallinopoulos? Were those all-important pages of history lost with some ancient ship that sank into the deeps in a violent storm? Perhaps this time some lucky diver would swim through a growth of seaweed and discover some clue that would solve the mysteries of man's origin once and forever. More artifacts are found every year, but none so far can be dated back or even attributed to the mythical island kingdom from the ocean to the west. The Mediterranean Sea must be the most thoroughly searched and mapped body of water on Earth. Quakes and tremors like recent ones in Italy and Turkey shift the floor of the sea. Old artifacts are dislodged from fissures and caves beneath the islands. Divers discover statues and urns that are used to expand knowledge of dead empires. Other relics fall into bottomless pits and remain lost forever. Could the actual written records of Atlantis be secreted near Greece, where Plato first gave the myth of the island continent to the Western world? Most geologists agree that the island of Malta is a fragment of an old land bridge between Italy and Africa. Huge megalithic monuments and tombs from that lost culture still exist on the island. The real mystery of Malta emerges from the 28 miles of underground tunnels hewed through solid stone. Within those passageways lies a maze of small rooms. 2 are decorated with red lines and spirals on the wall. Could this have been a place of safety constructed before the disaster that befell Atlantis? Why were the corbelled arches and the other features of the megalithic structures found above the ground recreated in the caves of Malta? The Phoenicians found the island without inhabitants. Only the structures remain. How does a society that achieves the art of pottery and metal casting disappear into oblivion? Like the Egyptians, the Mayans followed the same funeral rituals as the pharaohs. At the entrance of a tomb in a pyramid, the skeletons of 6 Mayan slaves were discovered. They must have been sacrifices chosen to accompany their master into the dark afterworld. A massive, elaborately carved stone weighing more than 5 tons had been placed over the tomb where the body of the priest-king rested. Who were the artisans that so painstakingly carved this exquisite burial stone? Are the exotic-looking creatures portrayed so graphically here and in stone throughout the jungle cities symbolic, or did they exist at that time and place on Earth? Were they extraterrestrials, or were they descendants of the sons of Atlantis? Could the Egyptian pharaohs and the priest kings of the Mayans been cousins? Inside the temple of the inscriptions were the remains of a bejeweled Mayan king. He was buried in an Egyptian style and wore a jade burial mask, earrings, and a single large pear-shaped pearl. Many civilizations have a passion for gold. The precious metal is invariably symbolic of the sun, which was the primary object of worship for both Egyptians and the Mayans, along with most other cultures found in both the Old World and the New World. There is an ancient Mediterranean saying, wherever gold is found, the Egyptians could not be far behind. Most modern investigators agree that there could not have been wholesale migrations across the Atlantic between the two continents. However, they do state that an occasional but accidental crossing might have been made through the troubled seas. New World attainments in mathematics, engineering, and astronomy are so sophisticated that their development must have taken many hundreds of years. The adventurous captains of the ships from Africa that could have landed on the shores of the Americas would have been explorers bent on far-ranging quests for gold, slaves, or virgin land. It is doubtful if visits from this type of seafarer would have accelerated the development of science in the New World. Itinerant sailors could explain the reason Cortez and his men were met by Indians who wore helmets, curved crested ones, identical in shape and design to those favored by the Greeks in the time of Alexander. It would also be an answer to the riddle of the spotty but obvious traces of Old World contact. What is the explanation for the strangely shaped half-pyramid structure that is so common in Iraq and Iran, appearing in the Yucatan jungle? Why do we find so many duplications in both continents? The art of plating, welding, soldering, forging in copper, gold, silver, platinum, and lead was practiced many hundreds of years before Columbus and Cortez landed. The Old World had a long history of experimentation before they were able to master these crafts. There is no history of experimental development in Mayan culture or legends. Man had always been able to perform these feats. Then there is an intricate procedure of casting known as lost wax. The earliest people able to cast metal by this procedure were the Phoenicians and the Incas. There could have been wholesale migrations that would solve the development and similarities of both continents, if in fact there was a landmass in the middle of the Atlantic. It would explain the endless inventory of cultural coincidences. Peruvian looms, both horizontal and vertical types, duplicate those of Egyptian origin from 1900 BC, down to the identical number and arrangement of working parts. The stone of Tizoc, found among the remains of the Aztec culture, is remarkably similar to ancient objects found in Macedonia and Babylon. Weaving spindles unearthed in Palestine and Egypt cannot be distinguished, even by experts, from those found in Mexico and Peru. Is the spiral found in the caves of Yucatan, on the rock in Ireland, on the island of Malta, and so many other places the link to the common origins of all mankind? Was this spiral the emblem of Atlantis? Dr. Maxine Asher.
Atlantis is located, I believe, or was located, in the Atlantic Ocean. It went from Bimini Island in the Bahamas to the coast of Spain, from Ireland to Nova Scotia, and probably spanned the entire Atlantic Ocean at one time in a series of islands. We believe the last piece of Atlantis sank about 9,600 BC, a date that has been given to us by Plato and also by certain scientific experiments dating materials that have come from under the ocean.
What if Plato was thinking symbolically when he said that Atlantis was swallowed up in a single day and a single night? Some geologists believe that the ice melting from the great ice cap at the North Pole slowly flooded the Earth and the water rose, covering the lower islands. Other scientists think that there was one supercontinent formed from granite that was not carried but deposited in one place. Still others maintain the granite formed first in patches, and then the patches grew together to form continents. The idea of a single continent on Earth seems extremely logical when you glance at a map. A map will show how well the Americas fit against Europe and Asia. The eastern bulge of Brazil fits into the Gulf of Guinea. The western bulge of Africa, together with Western Europe, fills a great hollow between Nova Scotia and Trinidad. Where the bottoms of South America and Africa then come together, Antarctica fits in. Australia goes beside Antarctica and India. Was this supercontinent Atlantis? Is the common spiral more than an insignia, but a message about how that single continent was formed by tidal currents?
Off the coast of Spain, we have evidence of many ancient cities. We know when the tides go out off the coast of Cadiz, we can see vestiges of Roman piping, such as the one I'm holding in my hand. Then we can find Greek remains, and under the Greek remains Phoenician, and ultimately pre-Phoenician. Finally, as my Spanish diver said, Francisco Salazar Casero, there are pre-Phoenician ruins which he believes are related to the lost continent of Atlantis. In 1973, I led an expedition off the coast of Cadiz, Spain, with divers, laymen, scholars, many people who were interested in finding out if Atlantis was a scientific reality. We had obtained the first permits in the history of the Spanish peninsula to search for the lost continent. We were very fortunate in having the Spanish government give us an entire building to house our facilities and to assist us in every way. On the morning of July 16th, 1973, Bill Farrell, Barry Sears, and two other divers sighted discoveries that had been made earlier by Francisco Salazar 95 feet down on the continental shelf. Those discoveries consisted of very large megalithic buildings, walls, blocks, artifacts, really an incredible civilization or remains of a civilization which we believe is the last piece of Plato's Atlantis. There is considerable evidence to indicate that Atlantis is a scientific reality and that Plato was correct, since the artifacts that were taken from the coast of Spain were dated between 7 and 9,000 BC, a date we believe reflects the final end or demise of Atlantis. After the Spanish experience in 1973, we moved on to Ireland. Atlantis probably existed at one time above the surface of the ocean in the Atlantic Ocean, and there's much evidence for that.
On the Aran Islands off the coast of Ireland, evidence of a prehistoric civilization has been discovered. Was this ancient outpost cut off from its builders in the dawn of prehistory? On the mainland south of the Mystic Isle, strange beehive tombs tunneled down into the earth in unending spirals. The builders of the tombs are as much of a mystery as their strange construction. They are isolated on a peninsula, which has yielded no other relics or artifacts that relate them to any of the legendary Irish tribes. The spirals found in front of the caves at Newgrange, Ireland, are possibly one of the clearest links between the old and the new world. Identical designs are found in caves throughout Mexico and South America. Dr. Neville of the University of Cork places Atlantis on his geological map of Ireland. Could he be on the right track? Stonehenge might have been stolen from Ireland. Could the stones have been radioactive? And could the radiation have been the witchcraft Merlin mentioned? Were the monuments at Malta part of a strategically placed network of monuments constructed throughout the world to conduct energy from the powers of outer space? Why did primitive tribes use them for religious rites long after their unknown architects had disappeared from the face of the earth? Where did the original builders of the arches and the giant stone monuments acquire the skill and technology to erect these structures? Was Atlantis merely a remnant of an even greater civilization? Maxine Asher discusses Dr. Miliani's Azore explorations.
Dr. Cesare Emiliani of the University of Miami did research at the Vima Fault near the Azores and made a statement that there were vestiges of rainwater and plants found underneath the ocean at the Vima Fault that had once been above the surface of the ocean. This indicated to Dr. Emiliani that, in fact, there were many continents going back perhaps 70 million years that were once above the surface of the ocean. Now, Atlantis, I believe, was one of those continents.
The world reacted with wonder when the lost cities of the Yucatan were discovered. Now it has been revealed that these pyramid structures must be much older than their outer surfaces originally indicated. Will these excavations prove to be as old as Jericho on the other side of the Atlantic? The Chacmul, a famous reclining god found in Maya and Toltec cities, appears widely in Southeast Asia from early Buddhist eras. The Mayan ear spools and copper bells are identical to those of Cambodia. What does the jaguar found in Mayan tombs have in common with the cats that roam the temples of Egypt? Why were there so many thousands of people sacrificed to the gods in the wells that seem to have no bottom? Could it have been related to people drowning in the disaster that destroyed Atlantis? Who was the god they worshipped that demanded the death of so many souls? Did the Mayans and the Incas believe these souls would be reincarnated in another life? It is rumored that Russian scientists have been able to decode the ancient Mayan inscriptions. Have they found any traces to the origins of this mysterious people? Perhaps the mystery of the Mayans will remain a mystery until we solve the riddle of Atlantis. What of the Sphinx in Egypt? Is it half man, half lion? On the Greek island of Delos, lions faithfully stand watch over deserted ruins. In Greece, at Mycenae, still another lion gate keeps watch over another ancient city. In astrology, the lion is a symbol for the sign of Leo. According to astrology, the world was in the age of Leo when Atlantis sank 12,000 years ago. Was the lion a reminder of the misdeeds of the people of Atlantis? The lion at Cadiz is almost African. Why is he immortalized in stone by this ancient Spanish port? Was the model for this beautiful piece of sculpture imported from Africa by some nobleman? Did the artist himself come from Africa to carve the stone from memory? Does the dolphin have supersensory powers? Are they telepaths? Why did the ancient astrologers name a constellation after this playful animal? Sailors consider the dolphin a lucky omen. Could this be because he swims in inland waters and stays close to land? Perhaps the Atlanteans were men that could live underwater, and the dolphins were his pets and companions. Cadiz is proving to be a treasury of information about ancient civilizations. Divers report that roadways, like those discovered at Bimini, lay under the water in a harbor nearby. Unfortunately, those waters cannot be explored at this time because of military restrictions. For many years, man had limited his underwater explorations to salvage operations. He was content to hunt for sunken treasure and retrieve cargoes from recent shipwrecks. Suddenly, man became aware of his total environment. The air was becoming polluted, the land ruined by pesticides and chemical fertilizers, and he is forced to look to the sea for food. This basic need, spurred on by man's innate curiosity, has forced a rapid development of marine technology and biology. There are schools that devote their entire program to oceanography. Millions of dollars are being spent on ships and highly specialized equipment so that mankind can study the oceans of his planet. Giant heaps of facts and figures began to pile up, and even the marine experts were surprised how little we knew about the bottom of our seas. Underneath the surface of the ocean, he discovered mountains taller than Everest, chasms deep enough to swallow the Grand Canyon, and a submarine mountain range that circles the Earth. Underneath its giant ice cap, Antarctica is a fifth smaller than anyone ever estimated. New land is rising in the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of California, and the Red Sea. Geologists and psychics both predict that California could split away from the continental United States in some future age. The Hawaiian Islands lie in an area where some great force is slowly, very slowly, thrusting up new islands at one end of the chain, while older ones behind them retreat back into the ocean. Some marine experts think the Hawaiian Islands may, in some distant time, sink into the sea. Could this prediction of our modern-day explorer scientists apply to the destruction of Atlantis? The urge to explore, to understand nature, also glitters with danger. But the true adventurer knows the risks he has taken. He calculates them carefully. Consider Magellan, who was the first man to sail around the world. Proud and arrogant, he boldly crossed a succession of unknown longitudes, over uncharted oceans. Magellan was a canny geographer. He had no delusions about the size of the Pacific. He knew the dangers of the task. Perhaps mankind can produce another Magellan. This time he will not sail the seas, but dive beneath them to find the lost city of Atlantis.
I became interested in Atlantis because my studies indicated that there must be a new and different explanation for man's earliest origins, and I believe Atlantis meets that need. I also became interested in Atlantis because of the many unexplained mysteries in Europe and the Mediterranean, like languages that cannot be deciphered, huge megalithic monuments, tombs and temples whose creators cannot yet be identified, and I think Atlantis will help to explain these mysteries. Where was Atlantis? Many people have asked that, and Atlantis has been placed in locations as far apart as South Africa and Antarctica. Atlantis, however, was in the Atlantic Ocean. It probably extended in a series of islands, from Ireland to Nova Scotia, and from Spain to the Bahamas, perhaps extending down through Mexico, Central and South America. Atlantis probably existed as far back as 30,000 BC, perhaps earlier, above the surface of the water in the ocean. According to Plato, and now according to recent scientific data, Atlantis sank about 9600 BC. Why study Atlantis? Atlantis has been a fascination for people all throughout the ages, and now I believe Atlantis can give us the explanation we need for man's origin and his place and his reason for being on Earth, just as the moonshot gave us an explanation of outer space.
Plato's description of the destruction of Atlantis could have related to the last remaining island of a once great continent. Are the ruins of Bimini the first of the empire's cities to sink into the sea, or the last?